Globalization, a concept so large that it is almost impossible to grasp without using examples. Its literal definition is either an economical one or a universal one, but it is certainly global. The history of globalization is closely related to the evolution of transport, because transport connects places and people to each other. Now you can travel to almost anywhere in less than 36 hours, while in the past it might have taken you days to travel to the nearest city. This development is part of globalization and closely intertwined with it, and also what makes it such a difficult subject to explain in its entirety. We're going to has exponentially grown in the last century and has fulfilled multiple roles. Transport has bettered economies and societies because of the fast spreading of information. New rules thusly spread fast, and news itself spreads like a wildfire. In the classical era, roads were quite good, mostly because of the Romans, who were obsessed by building roads as straight as possible to the nearest city. Thus, in their empire, new laws, forces passed through fast enough to uphold the order. When their reign was over and the Dark Ages came, in the early medievals, no roads were even built between certain places, because they were self-sustaining anyway, and it was far too unsafe to travel. The few roads that were there, though, were overflowing with highwaymen, bandits, and looters. Let's just say that the communications weren't quite on point back then, and that is why there were quite a lot of tiny kingdoms. A bit later, when Charlemagne and his father had their go with France and surroundings, the roads were much improved upon, and so Charlemagne could travel around the lands to bring order and peace. The economy also greatly improved because the trade routes were much safer and much more used. This led to the rapid expansion of cities and urbanization and the inevitable power they got. Which leads us to the Renaissance, the time in which exploration and discovery were booming. In that time, a few inventions were made which would pave the path to world travel and discovery. The compass and the caravel made it possible for the Portuguese to travel directly to India and accidentally stumble on America, which would later be a very lucky thing for them indeed. Because they made colonies in America, just like the rest of the Europeans would later, this brought their cultural traditions and religions to other continents, which is globalization. It also brought international trade to the world. Enlightenment began quite soon after that, and then everything in relation to transport expanded in growth until the internet became a thing. As said, the Renaissance was a time of bolstering science, curiosity, and boldly going where other people already lived and were living. These discoveries and inventions that were harvested from a good time of scientific research led towards an enormous expansion of countries, because they would snatch land overseas or take already existing lands from their own. I'm looking at you, England. These enormous empires were called a hegemony and were governed from a main country like England. Luckily, because globalization was a thing, people also heard of revolts more easily and fast, so Gandhi had an easier way of organizing his peaceful protests. Better transport allowed for better trade, and the Dutch were one of the first to acknowledge that fact. Who else, of course? The Dutch East India Company was one of the first worldwide companies to have ever existed, and it was funded by the country it was founded in. This made it far easier for them to create businesses, because they could just plonk a fortress down on the coast of what was then called the Dutch East Indies and build exploitation colonies. The people of Indonesia became workers in a corporation, and that corporation pretty much owned half of the archipelago, just as England did this to India. But they also had another idea, actually moving to their colonies. They did this in America, and it's called a settlement colony. The only problem was that they would have to kill almost all the original population. Aye, sorry for that one. No hard feels though. These colonies made it much easier for the hegemonies to advance in technology, and as England was the biggest of all of them, it gobbled up almost half of the world at some point. It had the most resources to advance technologically. The invention of the steam engine, or at least the more widespread use of it, made England incredibly advanced. America became independent, and they began discovering new technologies on a vast scale. Inventions such as the light bulb, the telegram, telephone, and all these things connected the world much more. We skip forward a bit, and we're in a war. A world war. Everybody is fighting one another, and there's all kinds of new things, like tanks and cars and even planes. Countries can communicate faster through telephones. This might lead to more war later, but not for now, because the war's over, and we're all quite happy with that. And we invent even more interesting stuff, like television and better transportation too, like even better cars, better planes, ships, trains, and oh no, another war! This war is the start of a lot of good things and bad things. Computers become a thing, and the internet gets invented. And everything is going so fast in the information transportation conglomeration that it's hard to grasp. Globalization is the evolution of communication, and the things leads to Globalization is the evolution of communication, and as a result, this ends up more like a history lesson than a geography lesson. We hope you've learned what you wanted to learn from this video, and give us some advice in the comments too if you want to. And perhaps in your spare time, you might want to spread communism for our Lord and Savior, Stalin.